Okay, so carbohydrate, remember, we're looking at how much?
45 to 65.
45 to 65% of your diet should be carbohydrate. Most people are going to be looking around 50-55% for being reasonably active, right? The more active, particularly if you're doing a strength event or a long distance endurance event, might be higher up the range. All right, protein is generally 10 to 15, 35 is the new ADA. I don't know if the CDC agree with that one, but it's really because the numbers don't add up and they want to make sure that they can get enough protein into specific groups that require it. All right, and just as an idea of what you want to be wary of, right? This is the kind of advert, and this is just out of a trashy girly mag. This is the kind of advert that we get fed, all right? So, mom, in a hurry to get the kids to school, doesn't have time for breakfast, and so they're trying to sell her this, right? What does this say?
First of all, it's small.
It's too tough to read.
Yeah, bring it over. I still can
It says energy rafting.
Energy for every day.
All right. Do we use protein for energy? Right? So this is the problem with some of the media and the marketing is this isn't a lie. Can we use protein for energy? Yes, if we have to, right? Most of us generally don't because we're not in a situation where we would need to utilize protein. We've got plenty of carbohydrate and fat, right? So the reason they can get away with that is physiologically it's possible to use protein for energy. But what they are trying to market is that instead of eating breakfast, she can have a protein drink, and that will provide her energy for the day.
False advertising.
False advertising.
Cool. Malarkey.
All right, malarkey, good one. Right? So, be wary when you are looking at the TV, when you're looking at magazines, when you're walking through the supermarket and they've got flyers or big displays, right? The protein market right now is going through the roof, and just don't believe everything they tell you. A lot of it is a little bit of a twist of the truth. So we were saying athletes are obviously going to need more protein than someone who is sedentary. All right, you do a lot of damage to your bodies when you're training, and protein is our building block. So we need to take in more protein than an average person, than a typical person, in order to provide enough amino acids for mending all the stuff we break, right? Even if you're not hurting, you still tear muscle fibers when you train, right? And they need to be fixed. No more than 1.7, 1.8, depending which book you're looking at, grams per kilogram a day. Right? There's no research to support eating any more protein than that, and 2 grams or more can lead to kidney damage. So be careful. Let's see. All right, protein supplies about 4 kilocalories per gram. Carbohydrate provides about 4 kilocalories per gram. All right, so energy-wise, they're reasonably equivalent. We just aren't going to use protein because we have other uses for it. We're dead.
They need to get you better equipment.
All right. So, high protein diets. Okay, it's a lot of conversation around right now about high protein diets. Unfortunately, lots of famous people have bought into high protein diets, so they get plenty of airspace on the TV when they're being interviewed and things. Generally, high protein diets aren't going to be recommended. There's lots of kickbacks health-wise to eating too much protein, particularly this issue, right? This kidney problem. So you can often tell if you're eating too much protein or if you have an athlete who eats too much protein. When we break down protein and we release ketones, it makes the urine smell sweet. So one way of identifying someone, for example, who is anorexic can be that change in the smell of the urine because they break down a lot of protein, right? They don't feed their body enough food, and so their body starts literally eating their muscles. So people who are severely anorexic have very little muscle mass, very bony looking, right? Because their body literally eats their muscles for energy, right? Because they don't give it any energy, it has to resort to something else. People who argue high protein diets say that the results that the people that don't want, the researchers say don't eat high protein diets, the people who say, well, of course, there's nothing wrong with high protein diets, say it isn't the protein that's the problem, it's the fact that most foods that have a lot of protein tend to be quite high in fat. And so they argue that the fat skews the data, all right? And the other argument is if we give our body more protein, the human body is built to adapt, and so it will adapt to using protein instead of fats and carbohydrates. But really you see a decline in performance. It takes quite a few weeks to start to see performance come back up. So not recommended for athletes. Right? You want a balanced diet. There's no reason to diet, there's no need to cut calories in one particular food group if what you want to do is lose fat mass. Right? The whole plan is our seesaw. Right? If I want to lose fat mass, then I want more calories going out than I've got coming in. That's all there is to it. Your body does not identify a protein calorie differently to a fat calorie or a carbohydrate calorie. It's a measurement of energy. It's not a measurement of food type. Right? More calories out, less calories in, you will lose fat mass over time. So you don't need to do a high protein diet, a high carbohydrate diet, a low carbohydrate diet, a high fat diet. You need a balanced diet with less calories coming in. That's all there is to it. Right? The rest of it is all a marketing issue to make you spend money on a product they are trying to sell you. Low-carb diets work very well. Here's one of the problems. She says, going off on another tack. Here's one of the problems. If what I want is to weigh 5 pounds less in 3 days' time, right? A low-carb diet achieves that very successfully. Because if I cut my carb intake down, when we store carbohydrate, we store it with water. Water is heavy. So, if I cut my carbohydrate intake down, I don't store so much water, and when I get on the scale, I lost 5 pounds. Except I didn't lose 5 pounds, really. I lost 5 pounds of water, and maybe half a pound of fat, possibly, if I was lucky, right? And I was exercising, which would be hard on a low-carb diet because you don't feel great on a low-carb diet. Your legs feel heavy. So, you see what I mean? You've got to take a big picture approach, because the problem is these diets make money because the immediate effect can look positive, right? The long-term effect typically is not positive. A, there are health kickbacks. B, most people who diet come off their diet and put the weight back on. So why not just change your eating plan so that it's healthy and it's balanced and you don't have to diet at all. Okay?
It's not as good.
Doesn't taste good. Diet stuff tastes good. All right, so if we're working with athletes, we say athletes need more protein. They're doing a lot more damage to their body that needs fixing. They may or may not actually be trying to build muscle mass. Depends on which type of athlete you're working with. All right? When do we give them this additional protein? Because the thing about protein is it's generally very filling. So if I'm going to increase my protein intake to 1.8 grams per kilogram, how do I eat that? You have to have steak for breakfast, steak for dinner, steak for lunch. Right? So we're going to supplement their protein, possibly. Right? We might give them a protein shake. My personal preference would be to encourage them to snack and to take a snack that is protein-based rather than a shake. Right? You want to develop healthy lifestyle habits. Protein shakes are not a lifestyle habit. They're a short gang. Right? So get rid of the protein shake and develop good eating habits instead. If you're doing resistance training, if you're doing a lot of weight training or a lot of bands, then what the research shows us is that we want to take in some protein either just before and or after the exercise. Right? And those two times increase protein synthesis. So that means that if I eat protein at that point in time, we see faster muscle repair or faster protein buildup within the muscles. Okay. Prior to the exercise, they think it's because as you start exercising, the amino acids move into the bloodstream and so they get distributed around the body a little bit more quickly. It increases the availability of the amino acids. And so the synthesis is stimulated to continue. Up to 3 hours, and I'll show you some other stuff in a minute that would say within 2 hours is the best bet, but up to 3 hours helps with the repair phase. So if you train really hard and then you don't eat for 5 hours, it takes longer to repair the damage that you did than if you can eat within 2 to 3 hours after training. Right? So the timing of when we're going to have this additional protein that we need is important. Ingestion prior to exercise has been shown to maximize protein synthesis, so can I eat just before? That might be one of the times, depending upon your athlete, that a protein shake might be useful. Because some people, if they eat less than an hour before they train, have digestive issues while they're training. So a protein shake or a protein bar, something that's lighter, that's going to digest and not feel so heavy, might be appropriate for the pre-training or the pre-workout. Muscle mass takes a long time. Lots of food, lots of sleep. Bodybuilders sleep somewhere around 10 to 12 hours a day. Right? They're not that big. Yes, they're cheating, most of them. Right? But still, with taking a steroid does not make the muscles grow. Right? You have to take the steroid and train like crazy to make the muscles grow. So, for the muscles to grow, your body needs a lot of food and a lot of rest. Okay? So you cannot say to your athletes, well, you know what, I expect you to put on 5 pounds of muscle mass in the next 3 weeks. No. It takes longer than that. If you want bigger muscles, you have to be prepared to set long-term goals. Okay? Now, if we're doing endurance training, we have a slightly different picture. Right? Endurance training supplementation is more about recovery. Right? I'm not looking to build muscle if I'm an endurance athlete. So I don't need the pre-workout protein to help my muscles lay down extra size. Right? So mostly with endurance athletes, you're looking at what are they doing after they finish their workout or their race. And what we see with them is that we need to combine carbohydrate and protein. And even these guys, a lot of the research has shown do better if you combine carbs with the protein. But the endurance athletes really can't take just carbohydrate. You do a lot of micro damage in the muscle if you run for 3 hours. Okay? If you're going to help those muscles recover, you've got to provide protein as well as carbohydrate. And so it will help with fixing, with the recovery of the muscles. It helps with glycogen resynthesis. If you combine some protein and some carbohydrate, we see faster glycogen store buildup. And there's some evidence to suggest that it might reduce soreness a little bit. So, if you're looking at protein, technically, proteins are made up of amino acids. If they're in the essential list, that means that we don't produce them in our body. We have to make sure that we eat them on a regular basis, all right? If they're in the non-essential list, that means that your body is able to make them for itself, given the right building blocks, all right? So these essential ones are crucial for protein synthesis in the muscles. So we've got to make sure that we've got all these being covered by the foodstuffs that we're eating, in particular the leucine. Oh. Ta-da! Okay, hold on. Sorry, the USB thing is not working. So. All right, questions on protein, because I know that a lot of you are training really hard now that they have LV here running a proper strength and conditioning program. Yes. That means that it should have changed your diets a little bit, because the amount of work he's got you doing is insane. Sometimes I go in there like, oh my God. If I was 30 years younger, that looks like it would be a lot of fun. So many of you probably are looking at trying to gain some muscle mass if you're working with LV. How are you going to go about doing that? All right? So just think more broadly. I'm biased about protein shakes. I am. However, there is a place for them sometimes. But you should not, the basis of your protein intake in your diet should not be protein shakes. Right? Because you're not gonna, you've got to develop healthy habits now that you're going to move forward with. And when you're in your 40s, you probably are not going to be taking protein shakes. So where is that protein going to come from? Right? What are you going to do if you have an athlete who says, well, I don't eat meat? Right? How? You probably can't pull that off. Right? How are you gonna, what do you know, right? What are you gonna suggest that they're eating so that they're meeting the protein requirement for the training that you're giving them? Plus, protein shakes are expensive, guys, and tuna tuna's pretty cheap. Just saying. Just make sure it's dolphin friendly. All right. It's got to be dolphin friendly.
What's the other result?
What does that mean?
Well, because you don't want to eat tuna that murdered loads of dolphins in order for you to eat it. Or maybe you do. I don't.
Biased against dolphins.
No, I'm biased in favor of dolphins. All right. So, we've looked at carbohydrates. We've looked at proteins. We're going to look at triglycerides or fats. So, now, what's our ratio for our fat intake? All right, we want less than 30%. Okay. And of that, less than 10% should be saturated. So you want more of your fat intake to be unsaturated than saturated. We've got to have fat, All right, sometimes we get into a mindset where we go, well, I'm just not going to eat any fat, right? Because I'm too fat and I'm going to lose fat, so I won't eat any fat. Right? Remember, it's not the fat that causes the problem, it's the overall number of calories. You can cut fat out and still put on weight. Okay? So, fat isn't the problem, it's how much fat is in the diet is the key. Okay? And what kind of fat are we eating? We've got to have fats. When you stop eating fats, your nails get very dry, your hair gets very dry. I've actually seen someone peel their nails, right? Literally like an onion, peel their nails because they were taking in so little fat. Plus, we want to have, particularly the guys, want to have testosterone available for building muscle. If I want to make steroid hormones, I need fat in my diet, okay? And it has way more energy than protein or carbohydrate. 9 kilocalories per gram, so over double the amount of energy than carbohydrate contains. So it's a really great source of energy if you're doing the right kind of workout to utilize it, right? We store it in fat cells. We also store it in the muscle. If you buy a nice steak, good steak is marbled, right? Tastes better when you cook it because it's got fat in it, right? We store fat in the muscle tissue. So the enzyme that helps us to break fat down is called lipase, ASE. Anything with ASE is an enzyme. So lipase facilitates breaking down lipids. And when we break them down, we get fatty acids, and they're released into the bloodstream. You might see information about fatty acids in the bloodstream. Okay. Fatty acids are what we break down to make ATP in energy system 3 after 20 minutes. Okay. So, you guys have been sitting here for longer than 20 minutes. You're working at very low intensity, very little workload. This is very aerobic. It's not high intensity, you're not using a lot of calories, but sitting here uses predominantly fat to fuel it. Right? Just not enough fat to make sitting here get us to lose weight. Okay? So that would be cool, wouldn't it? We could just sit in class and lose. Right? That would be a good way to go. All right? The problem with it is that high fat intakes are associated with weight gain increase and higher blood pressure and higher cardiovascular risk. So we've got to kind of weigh it up, and we've got to find what is healthy for the individual. So, easy breakdown of fats when we're looking at them in our diet. You could break them down into 2 groups and just say we've got unsaturated or saturated. The unsaturated are the goodies, the saturated are the baddies. They're not really bad, it's just that we need to be a little more careful how much of them we take in. Although there's some recent research, and I haven't read it carefully, but there's recent research that says, you know, saturated fats may not be as bad as we once thought they were. So that will be interesting to see where that goes. For now, generally, the health organizations suggest keep your saturated fat down less than 10% of your total calorie intake. Okay? Unsaturated can be further broken down into monos and polys. Okay? Monos Olive oil, avocados, peanut oils, all very healthy kinds of fats. Polyunsaturated, nuts, seeds, soybean oils, right? And then the other term you're going to see is omega-3s and omega-6s. And they've been shown to have really positive health benefits. So maybe try to include some more fish, particularly fatty fishes, salmons in your diet when you can, right? Let's see. Chicken and fish go here. Red meats go here. It is possible. Generally, what we're worried about is having too much fat in our diet. As I said, it is possible to have too low a level of fat in your diet. And we've already said we need fats in the diet to help us make testosterone. So if your diet is very, very low in fat, it could impact testosterone production, which would then knock on to muscle synthesis, because guys in particular use testosterone to build big muscles. So that would be difficult. Strength athletes want to make sure that they've got 15 to 20% fat in their diet, right? So that they're able to synthesize lots of muscle tissue after training and competing. High fat diets. Oh joy. Any of you remember Atkins' diet? You were a bit young probably when the Atkins diet was super fancy. Okay. Atkins' diet is a high-fat diet. By high fat, we're looking at 55 to 85%. So when they recognize something as a high-fat diet, we're talking serious, like over half your calories from fat. In theory, right, because we use fat as an energy source, then in theory, the argument is that if I increase my fat intake, I will use more fat as an energy source and less carbohydrate as an energy source, right? That would provide a glycogen sparing effect. So at the end of the race that we were talking about on Monday, I would have more glycogen left to sprint that last leg in, right? But the actual results are a little equivocal when you look at what really happens. If you increase your fat intake and you're looking at short-term 4 or 5 days, then we see quite a large negative impact on endurance and high-intensity exercises. Okay? So there's no benefit in the short term. If you look at the studies that are going long term, longer than a week, which argue this idea, this glycogen sparing idea, then what we see is if it's a moderate intensity workload, less than 80%, it's possible it may improve a little bit. If it's high intensity, performance goes down, right? So the results for high-fat diets from a performance point of view are very mixed. Regardless of the performance, the health experts say high-fat diets increase your risk of cardiovascular disease and other problems. So even if there's a possibility that a high-fat diet might help your performance, the negative side of the argument with your long-term health I don't see that that's worth the risk. Okay? So athletes are a funny bunch. Winning is really, 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 really important. And I will do anything to win. Because I'm 18, 19, 20, 21, I'm going to live forever. I'm healthy. Nothing hurts me. I can train for hours. I can run really fast. It doesn't matter if I do this, it will be all right. It's 50 years down the line. Right? Be sure that you are clear when you're trying to describe to them what some of the problems are here. All right? Okay. I think I have another day on this chapter, which means we could be...
Should be next Wednesday, right? Because we're Friday and
Oh,
Monday.
yeah, Friday, Good Friday, time school.
Monday is national.
We don't have it next class.
Monday's Easter Monday, so.
Go to Monday, yeah.
Jesus
I
said us-
suggest you look at your syllabus.
Friday.
But Jesus said us-
We don't have class next Wednesday.
All right. We don't have class Wednesday next week, I think.
We really didn't have class on
Just Friday's Good Friday.
I know.
It's Jesus.
I'm sorry.
Jesus is Friday.
He'll
Jesus is
forgive
Friday
you.
and Monday.
He'll forgive you, right? Isn't that what he does?
Well, I don't have class in my.
I know. Outside my realm of understanding. All right, so on Friday we'll start with vitamins. We'll look at vitamins and minerals. Probably should check. You can't have Friday off. You got Wednesday off.
Yeah, we'll come on Wednesday.
Jeez, guys.
Yeah, we'll come.
It's just because we have to get ready for you.